friends, welcome or welcome back to the Infinite Library, and today I am going to be talking to you about the best books I've read in 2025. I had a great reading year, really unexpected. I don't know if it's just because I've been a little bit more mindful about my reading. I've still been trying to read quite diversely. I've been reading in my comfort genres but also out of my comfort genres at times. And I think I've also let myself DNF, which has helped and means I had no 1 stars. Might not have been the case if I hadn't have decided that I could DNF stuff. So I actually have 15 books that are in my best books of the year. They're almost all 5 stars, which is why I just couldn't do 10. I had to do 15. And I have some honourable mentions that I just want to mention briefly on here because I haven't been doing wrap-ups this year. I will be doing a whole tier ranking kind of thing with every single book I've read this year. So you'll get kind of a big wrap-up at some point, but that probably won't be out for a couple of weeks or so. So I'll tell you a little bit about my honourable mentions as well because they were too good to not mention as well. But first, before I go through the actual books, let's go through some stats that I have. So, total books read. According to Goodreads, I don't know if it's probably not completely accurate. I suspect it might be 1 book less or maybe 1 book more. But I apparently read 226 books. I think that's higher than last year. I can't remember what I read last year. Number here, I guess. For editing Kyla to figure out, but I'm pretty impressed by that. You know, I obviously still read a lot of graphic novels and manga, which means things like the page count and books do go up quicker than perhaps people that are just reading novels. But yeah, pretty happy with that. I never really have a reading goal as such. I think I just put 100 down on Goodreads, but I don't even care if I make that goal. But what I'm happy about is that of those 226 books, I liked most of them. In fact, I loved quite a lot of them, as you'll see in this video. So, other stats I can tell you about. As well as those 226 books, I did have 36 unfinished books, whether they are DNFs, soft DNFs, or just books I started and then kind of put on hold to get back to at another point in time. Which, this is why I've not had any 1 stars, I think, because definitely I feel like some of those DNFs could have been 1 stars. Total pages read, according to Storygraph this one is, so I don't know how accurate it is, but 72,078 pages. My top genre, of course, was fantasy. 88 books were fantasy, but that is not even half of the 226 I read. So I also read a lot of other genres. Horror is definitely my next genre after fantasy, but I'm still primarily a fantasy reader, I think. Number of books off my TBR I read, 103, which isn't bad. That's almost half of the books I read were books that were from my TBR. And although you've seen me doing my treasure and trash episodes, I've still got a lot of books to get through, but I think I have actually been starting to make a chunk into my TBR, and honestly it would have been so much more if I hadn't have got really distracted doing projects like the Goodreads Awards. I just find it so fun. I can't help it. I do take out a lot of library books too, but yeah, I've obviously got a bunch more content planned, which is not necessarily from my TBR, but after that, we're back to the TBR again because I'm actually pretty impressed with that dent I've made in my TBR. Number of series I finished, 8 actually, which is better than I thought. I'll go through all this at some point in a future video when I go over my series tracker again. A couple of them are manga, but some are actual book series, and I'm pretty happy about finishing 8 series. In terms of the format, I finished 176 books physically. Some of these are tandem reads as well though, so the numbers are probably not going to totally add up to 226. 46 books were ebook only and 73 were audiobook. This was truly the year that I got into audiobook reading, and also definitely a reason for why I've got this high number, because if I'm just waiting for the bus or I'm doing a mindless task, I'll put an audiobook on. And that has really helped me get through lots of books, to be honest. First book of the year that I read was Daughter of the Moon Goddess. Is also an honourable mention. Last book of the year was My Next Breath by Jeremy Renner, and we started off pretty strong because we started off the year on a mid-4 and we ended it also on a mid-4. So that's pretty good. The longest book I read was The Liar's Key by Mark Lawrence, which was the third and final book in, I think it's the Fool series or something. It's like, it's the sequel series to The Prince of Thorns. The first book is Prince of Fools. That was 673 pages. There were definitely other books, if I'd finished them this year, would have actually been this longest book, but as it is, this is the longest book. The shortest book was a very small short story I read called Ace of Her Sleeve by Genevieve Demova, which was a kind of in-between story between her book Foul Days and The Sea. I read 15 5-star books this year, which is pretty damn good. I'm very happy with that number. And I don't give 5 stars easily, by the way. It is hard for me to give a 5-star. I've just read some absolute corkers this year. The most books I read in 1 month apparently was in August, where I read 32 books. I don't even know how. I don't even remember what I read in that month. I suspect I got back into the Higurashi manga, and that's how I got through so many books in that month. But I know at least some of them are actual novels. Okay, so on to my top 15 books that I read in 2025. These are all 5 stars, apart from the book at number 15. I just really like this book so much that I'm including it in here, even though it's technically like a 4.75. And that book is The Crimson Moth by Kristen Kikarelli. I did not expect to love this book as much as I did. This is so readable, and like, you know my history with romantasy, I just don't always gel with a lot of romantasy. I kind of think because this is YA romantasy though, that might be why it worked more for me, because YA romantasy I think has more plot and like more interesting character like moments, because we're not just going to go to the smut. So I think that's why it worked for me. I read this back in like, I want to say February or March. I think I actually took it to a reading retreat with me and read it completely all in one day at the reading retreat. And I did this originally for my Reading Booktuber favourites. And this was Becca and the Books pick. And yeah, I really loved it. I thought it was great. It was so readable. I did go buy the sequel as well and also read it. I didn't like the sequel quite as much, but I still really love this couple in this book, and I just think it's a very readable, really fun book. I didn't give it a 5-star purely because I don't think it's really doing anything particularly new or unique, but I just had the best time when I was reading it. So that is why this is at number 15 in the list. And number 14, this was the year that I started to get back into epic fantasy, which was really nice. I was really struggling with epic fantasy for the past couple of years now, so I started like going into different subgenres like cozy fantasy, urban fantasy. That was kind of more my speed, but I was really struggling to get into these big, chunky, big epic fantasy books. But I started to enjoy them again this year, and that is actually what number 14 is. I believe it's also a debut, and this is the start of a series. This is A Song of Legends Lost by M.H. Ayinde. I read this for Yalk. It also, you know, was a special edition book from Illumicrate, but I read this initially for Yalk because it was one of the authors who was going to be there, and I really enjoyed this. This just worked for me on so many levels. The characters, the world building, the lore, everything was so interesting, so well done. This is a book that is essentially a mix of different Eastern cultures. So it's very much like inspired by stuff like Polynesian folklore, by various African folklore, a bunch of different folklores essentially. Also really cool character art, by the way, of some of the main characters that I just realised I totally forgot that I had in this, because I did get these at the event. Yeah, this book just really worked for me, and this honestly was the first book I read this year that made me feel like I could get back into epic fantasy again. Obviously, it's not small. It is quite chunky, But yeah, I had a really good time with this, and I'm really excited to get to the next book in this series. At number 13, we have a short horror and an author. There's a lot of horror on this list, by the way. And this is an author that I've heard about a lot, but never actually tried his books before. And I have already seen a movie adaptation of this book, which wasn't the best, but I liked it well enough. Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. I shockingly did this via audiobook. I don't listen to a lot of horror by audiobook, but this one just really worked for me in audiobook. Because usually if I think the writing is gorgeous, which I do think this is, I prefer to read that with my eyes, but audiobook weirdly worked for me. Yeah, this is like a kind of a sci-fi horror about this gay couple who are in a house with their adopted child, and these people come and force them to make a decision, shall we say, that is to do with the end of the world. It's really emotional, it's really tragic, but I really, really loved it. And yeah, kind of a surprise favourite. Like, I liked the movie well enough, but I love the book. I think the book is brilliant. And yeah, I'd highly recommend it. I definitely want to try more out by this author now. I just haven't got around to it yet. I know he also wrote, I think it's the Pallbearers Club or something. He's usually like not rated very well on Goodreads, but I know some people like Books and Lala really like his stuff, and I think he's definitely an author for me. I just think his writing is absolutely gorgeous. Coming in at number 12, technically 2 books, but this is a duology and I'm including both books in this series. It was also my first 5-star of the year, and this is the Reaper series by Rin Chapeko. So Silver Under Nightfall is the first book, and then Court of Wanderers is the second book. And I just loved this book so much. The vibes were immaculate. It's very Castlevania inspired, which if you know me, I love Castlevania. It's got a polyamorous throuple in it. I love the characters. It's about vampires. Literally, this is just checking off everything I love tropes wise, and it had it all, and I really, really enjoyed it. Like, again, is it the most brilliant thing ever? No, but it's exactly what I wanted it to be, and to me that meant it was a perfect duology, and definitely going to be checking out more by this author as well. Number 11 is actually the only book of these 15 that I do not currently own my own copy of, and I read this for when I read all the Goodreads horror books. There are a couple of those books in here, which was really nice. I got some really good books out of that, obviously in the honorable mentions as well, but it's Immaculate Conception by Ling Ling Huang. First time I've read this author, wanted to check this author out for ages now. I think she initially wrote Natural Beauty, but I read this book because it was in the Goodreads horror and I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. I do think it's more sci-fi, literary sci-fi specifically, than it's horror, but I really, really love this book. I thought it told a beautiful story about a toxic friendship, to be honest. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. We'll definitely get my own copy at some point. Right, on to the top 10 and a surprise novella. And if you've heard me talk about this author before, you know that I have liked every single one of this author's books that I've read so far. I've never given this author a 5-star. Until now. Yeah, T. Kingfisher's What Moves the Dead. This is the first in the Swan Soldier series. I've read book 1 and book 2 at this point. We'll be reading the 3rd book soon. I didn't love book 2, but this book just worked for me on so many levels. This is the first time I've liked an adaptation of The Fall of the House of Usher. This is a short novella, botanical horror, which is kind of a buzzword for me. What I also kind of call cottagecore horror sometimes. But this just worked for me so well. I loved the lore of the world. I really thought the characters were so interesting. T. Kingfisher always does really good, like, eccentric cast of characters, and I've always loved that in her books. But I think this is the first time where I think the plot has hit that 5-star mark for me, and it's done it in a very short amount of time as well. Yeah, this was perfect to me. I thought this was great. I've read quite a few T. Kingfishers at this point. I think I've read The Twisted Ones, Nettle and Bone, Sorceress Comes to Call, the one with the raven on the cover, what I've forgotten. I do want to try more by her. But yes, my first 5-star by her. I really, really enjoyed it. Really appreciated having a non-binary protagonist as well. We don't get that very often. Also, I've noticed a lot of my favourite books in this video have been gay as well, which I love. Queer horror really has been doing it for me this year, and I'm glad I found so many of them. But yeah, this was great. I had a great time. I didn't love the second one as much, unfortunately. We'll see if I do like the third one, but a brilliant, brilliant book. Number 9, and probably not a surprise, because I feel like if you read it this year, which a lot of people read it the previous year, it's gonna be in your favourite books. But One of the Many by James Arlington. I read this at the very start of this year. I think it was either for BookTube favourites or it was me reading the Goodreads Awards. I think it was the Goodreads Awards, because this was in the fantasy and didn't do super well, but I thought it was brilliant. The second book has just come out. I haven't got to it yet, but really, really good starting point to the series. Has great characters, great world building, has a really cool twist towards the end that pushes this storyline into areas that I didn't think it was going to go into. And again, an epic fantasy that I really got into. So I've been finding really good epic fantasies this year. And yeah, really solid. It's not my favourite epic fantasy of the year, because that does go to another book coming up. But I thought this was really, really good. Loved all the academia stuff, did like our main character, and so intrigued as to where it's going. At number 8, also probably the favourite book of a lot of people from last year, but I only got to it this year because I did indeed read it for BookTuber favourites. I think this was Riley Marie's book, The Eyes Are the Best Part, by Monica Kim. This is brilliant. This is such a good horror. It's been likened a lot to what is a lot of people's favourite books of this year, which is Bat Eater by Kylie Lee Baker, which I did also like, but it just wasn't quite hitting the mark for me in terms of its tone, which is why it was an honourable mention and not in my tops. But this was great. This made me chuckle a lot. The political commentary was brilliant. I don't know what else to say about it. This is a brilliant book. If you haven't read it and you like horror, highly, highly recommend. It's also not very long. So yeah, very good. For anyone that doesn't know what it's about, it is essentially about I want to say she's Korean. Yes, this is a feminist psychological horror about a Korean girl whose mother starts dating an American man who's clearly fetishizing their culture, and then she starts to really get obsessed with the idea of eating his eyes. And it kind of goes from there. And it really pushed the bar of where I thought it was going to go to, and it stuck the landing, and I had a lot of fun with this book. Similarly, we're carrying on with the female rage type of horror, because the next book we have is The Lamb by Lucy Rose, which I went to a book event for months back and then finally got to read it for reading the Goodreads horror, and I had high expectations because a friend of mine read it, adored it. It's a 5-star. It's also her favourite book of the entire year, and whilst it wasn't quite my favourite of the year, it was my favourite that I read in the entire Goodreads horror category and was my pick to win. This is such a beautiful book. Like, yes, is it kind of gnarly, a story about cannibalism? Yes, there is a finger in it as a bookmark that I got at the event. But this is also a beautiful story about a child who was growing up in a sheltered environment with toxic parents, shall we say, and how she starts to grow and think for herself. And this is a folk horror tragic fairy tale at its heart. And I think a lot of people possibly get stuck on the idea of the cannibalism part of it, or they don't realise that this book is actually very poetic and literary, and they're just expecting a horror, and that's not really what this book is. This is gorgeously written, made me cry, which not many books have made me cry, but this made me cry. I usually don't cry in a horror either, but yeah, this was an absolutely beautiful book. I was so sad at the ending, but also it felt right, and it felt committed to what it was doing as a folktale. And yeah, a truly, truly beautiful book. If you've been doubtful about this book and you're maybe kind of either put off by the fact that it's about cannibalism or that it's slightly more literary, I would urge you to try it anyway, because I think it's also very accessible. And I think in a weird way it's relatable. Obviously not for the cannibalism bit, but what this girl goes through, like at the heart of it, this is about a girl growing up in an abusive household and finding her own ways out of it and to think for herself when she's been kind of indoctrinated into something. And yeah, it's a beautiful book. I cannot wait to see what else Lucy Rose does, because this is a debut. And this should have been in the debut category for Goodreads. I'm upset that it wasn't, because it deserved to be in there. Number 6, and completely, tonally, the opposite, to be honest. Although there is kind of a theme of death. But we have Long Live Evil by Sarah Rees Brennan. Another one I read for Yalk. One that when it came out last year, I was obsessed with the cover and kind of obsessed with the premise of this kind of being, if you are in the manga sphere, you may know that there is an awful lot of what we call isekai, which is a character being transported into another world. And there's been an awful lot of what we call villainess isekai, which is a girl gets transported into a storybook world, but as the villain rather than as the heroine. And that's what this book is. This is the first time I've seen this really done in like a Western format rather than as a manga. And I really like how Sarah Rees Brennan did this. I've not read from this author before, other than a couple of stories that she wrote in various Cassandra Clare anthologies. Lovely woman, by the way, as well. I did speak to her at Yale because she was so nice. But yeah, this was, again, the vibes were immaculate. I loved the cast of characters. I loved the protagonist so much, and I feel like that's actually what a lot of people have issues with in this book, because she's kind of mean. But I can really understand her viewpoint, because to start off with, in this book, this is a girl who is dying of cancer. Something that was happening to Sarah Rees Brennan at one point. She is thankfully in recovery now, but this is a very personal story. And I appreciated how this character was presented throughout, as initially as someone who, because she was ill, kind of drove away a lot of the people around her. And when she gets put into this world, she's like, fuck it, I'm gonna be the villain, I'm gonna wreak havoc, and I'm gonna try to do my best to survive and get back to my life, but I'm gonna have a good time doing it as well. And she ends up forming this little posse of like other villains, and it's just so fun. I love books that take tropes and tear them apart, and this book really does it. And if you kind of know isekai villain stuff, this is such a treat. And I had such a good time with it. I really loved it. And yeah, I really loved the protagonist, Ray, which I know a lot of people don't, but I really connected with her. And I like that she wasn't just like, she really wasn't like the heroine. She really was okay with kind of doing things that were a bit nasty to get things done, but also she had so much heart as well. A story for anyone who's ever fallen for the villain, which is kind of a whole deal in this book, but not necessarily in the way you expect. I loved the ending twist as well. I did not see it coming, and I was very happy with it, and it's left things in an interesting state, shall we say, for the second book, which is coming out next year, and I'm so excited for it. I love this book so much. Really, really had a good time. The top 5 now, these really are the ones I found it tough to put in order. Number 1 and number 2 were almost interchangeable for me. That's how much I love those 2 books. But number 5 is another epic fantasy, and it's a standalone fantasy. This is Blood Over Bright Haven by M.L. Wang. Another one I read for BookTuber's Favourites. I think I read this one for Tiff Reads Books, but also I believe Jess Owens had this as one of their favourites too, so I kind of read it for both of them. This book is wild. If you don't already know about this book and how freaking good it is, please go check it out. This is a book that starts off being almost a traditional kind of dark academia fantasy book. We're following what is the first female magician basically inside this university. All the magic they do is like through these, I think they're called like spellographs or something, which are kind of magical typewriters. And then we're also following this guy who is essentially from a minority group that fled from outside Brighthaven, which is the city, and now lives there basically as like a servant. The two of them end up kind of getting paired up in like this unlikely pairing, and there is a twist that changes everything you think you know about this book. It's so well done. I need to read more by this author. The Sword of Kaigen, I believe, is their other book, which I would definitely try. And I appreciate the fact that this could have been a series. The author could so easily have carried this story on, but they kept this as a standalone. It's not even like the biggest book ever. It's decently thick. It's 400 pages, but they told a complete story in this book and they didn't need to carry on, and they were happy to leave it where it was at this ending, with a very brave ending, I would say. And I just think it was brilliant. Blew my mind. Also read this one on the reading retreat. I read some bangers of that reading retreat, but I also did read some of my worst books in the year of that reading retreat, so a mixed bag overall. Right, number 4 and the last epic fantasy on this list. Still amazed how much epic fantasy made it into this list, to be honest. Only slightly beating Blood Over Brighthaven, and that's because I love this world so much and I really adore these characters, and I'm happy that this is a series because I want to carry on with these characters. Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is a botanical, kind of weird Victorian Cthulhu-esque sort of world. And we're following, this is actually a murder mystery. I think all the books are murder mysteries. And we're following a kind of Sherlock and Watson kind of duo. But Sherlock is this like old woman who's really kooky and I love her to bits. And Watson is this dyslexic boy who is very good at investigation in his own right, but in a different way from how Anna is. And yeah, I really don't want to tell you much about the plot of this one because it's so good just to watch it unveil itself to you. And yeah, this was so good. I really loved it, and I can't wait to carry on with the series. Book 3, and one that I feel like I've heard no one talking about, but it had a very personal effect on me, and I think that is not just because it's a good book, but also because of the time I read it at. I read it in kind of a rough time in this year when I was grieving, and I was really struggling to get into books. But this book has this somber tone about it that perfectly fit what I needed at that time. And it's Lorraine Wilson's We Are All Ghosts in the Forest. This is I want to say a literary sci-fi. We're following a time basically where the internet kind of crashed and it doesn't exist anymore, at least not in the format we know. Technology doesn't really exist anymore, but everything that used to be technology is kind of like these digital ghosts that are haunting the world and can corrupt people. A lot of this is about what we've lost, trying to start things again in a broken world, starting from nothing. And we're following this main character who is a mixed race person in, I believe it's like a Nordic country where this is set. I can't quite remember where it's set. I want to say like the Netherlands or something, but she is an outsider in this small village of people, and she takes in this boy who is needing her for some reason and isn't able to remember much, can't speak, and there is something to do with his father that is haunting our main character as well. There's also a lot of talking to bees in this book, which I really enjoyed, because basically our main character is kind of what we could consider to be a hedge witch, and this interesting mix of this natural magic and the digital stuff that was also happening, where the digital has become supernatural, and has become horrifying and is haunting people quite literally. It was such a fascinating mix, and yeah, I really love this book. I need to check out her next book in this series, which is called The Salt Oracle. Not like a direct sequel, but I think just a book set in the same world with different characters. But yeah, this was a book that just really hit me at the right time, and it was exactly what I needed, and it made me very emotional, but in a good way, when I needed to feel the things that I needed to feel. Another one that I read because of Yauk, the author was there, and she was really lovely as well. I'm glad I got to meet her, especially because this book had such an emotional impact on me. Okay, we're on to the last two, and they're both queer horrors. As I said, clearly a thing this year that was really working for me. And these are almost interchangeable, to be honest, between 2 and 1. I've only just picked one over the other because whilst they've both lived rent-free in my head ever since I've read them, I think this one just slightly more, as in number 1, not number 2. But number 2, which I still absolutely adore and can't wait to read more books by this author, is Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. Again, botanical queer horror is killing it this year. Although I think this actually came out last year. So I was actually gifted this by some friends for my birthday because I was obsessed with it. Even before I read this, I was kind of obsessed with it. I loved seeing the fan art of it. The premise alone just worked so much for me. Absolutely obsessed with this book. This is a queer love story between an asexual boy and another boy. Basically, they're at this boarding school. An incident happened the previous year, and one of them writes stories, the other one draws pictures, and those pictures, which are of monsters, are coming to life in the forest and attacking them, essentially. And they're also starting to realise their feelings for each other, and there's a lot of queer angst along with that, and also a really good depiction of asexuality in a romantic relationship, which I loved getting to see that. And yeah, this was such a perfect book. I love this so much. I will get to Hazelthorne ASAP for sure, and also just very excited about the next books this author is coming out with. I believe they're coming out with their first adult horror very soon, which I have an audio arc for. And yeah, just really, really happy I discovered this book and how beautiful it is, and it's just so good. And again, kind of showing that YA horror can pack a punch and can be amazing. So that is my number 2. And finally, my number 1, a very short little book, which I also read at the reading retreat for Booktuber's favourites, actually, because I believe this was for Jess Owens. I can't exactly remember who it was for, but it's Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. This is sapphic cottagecore cannibalism horror with kind of an obsession thing going on in the relationship. It gets messy, it gets twisted, it gets absolutely wild, and I loved every minute of it. I loved how the first half was just this romance between these two characters, and I love both of these characters so much. I loved seeing that unfold and this being this sweet, hopeful romance, and then it twists and gets corrupted and turns into a screaming horror, and I loved it. I loved it so much. Like, there are definitely shades of the lamb in this. Cannibalism horror has been kind of big this year. It was obviously in some of my honourable mentions as well, with The Starving Saints, possibly others I can't even remember. There's been so much female, lesbian, cannibalism horror this year. And I don't know how that became the theme of the year, but it kind of has. Yeah, absolutely adored this book. Obsessed with this author now. Going to be trying to read anything and everything she's written. And it has literally... I read this in one sitting in a day, and it has not left my head since. Obsessed. Loved it so, so, so much. And it's just my perfect type of horror, which I didn't expect. Like, not only do we have the really scary dark stuff, but we have the heart as well. And we have queerness, which is also great. A really, really great book. I don't really even want to say what it's about because honestly, just go in blind. But basically, it is about two women that meet at a market and form a connection. And it goes from there. And there is cannibalism. Adored it. Adored it so, so, so much. Also, this cover is freaking gorgeous. It's such a beautiful book, inside and out. But yeah, that is my #1 book of the year. Still obsessed about it. Really need to reread it ASAP because I just want to get back to that feeling again of reading it because it was so good. My poor friend Anna, like during this reading retreat, seeing me going through all these mix of emotions and reading some of my favorite books of the years, I don't know what she was thinking. But yeah, that's it. That is my favorite books that I read this year. I read some really good ones. I'm excited to read more books this year. Some of these obviously have sequels now, which, you know, is great for me to get to. And that's it. Let me know any other books you could recommend to me based off what you think what my favorites are. And until the next video, I guess, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you next time. Bye!